Welcome to Shul.com. Good morning, guys. Chodesh Tov. It's Rosh Chodesh Tevet. We have been learning a little bit about the history of Hanukkah, a little bit about the story, about what happened. Just as a side note, I want to just explain a little bit of the terminology of some of the individuals. We say, Bimei Matitya ben Yochanan, Kohen Gadol, Hashmonai Ubanav, I want to clarify a couple of things. You have Matitya ben Yochanan, Kohen Gadol. We don't have in our history any Kohen Gadol that was named Matitya. We don't see it in the Gemara any rabbi mention or any mentioning of Matitya Kohen Gadol. So we're going to assume that Matitya ben Yochanan was a Kohen, not Gadol as Kohen Gadol, but a big Kohen, an important Kohen. Unless you're going to reference the Yohanan Kohen Gadol that's brought down in Pirkei Avot. Let's take a look. I want to clarify a couple of things. There was a rabbi, Yohanan Kohen Gadol. He shimesh shmonim shana. For 80 years he was Kohen Gadol. And after 80 years, he snapped and he became a Siduki, and he went against the rabbis. And we don't know if this Yohanan Kohen Gadol was the father of Matitya ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. According to one opinion, it was, or we don't know if it was one of the children that came out later. Why do I say this to you? Because Matitya had 5 sons, which we're going to read about shortly, and he was an old man. He actually didn't do the battle. His family, according to one opinion, was called the Hashmonaim. Why? Because they came from a city in Israel called Hashmona, and they came from this city. And so normally, when people came from a city, they would call them after the name of the city. It's very common.
Where was the Hashmonaim? The north,
so I don't know the exact location. I don't know the exact location. I didn't look it up. We can research and find out. But they say Hashmona was a city, and they came from the city. And he had 5 boys. According to another opinion, no. There were 2 families, because if you look at the Rashi says, I believe that there were 13 total Maccabim. So there were 5 from the family of Matitya, and then there were additional either 8 that came from another family, or there were Maccabim. Let me explain to you. According to the other opinion, it says that Hashmona was a different person. There was Matitya ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, him and his 5 children. Then there was another individual, Hashmona, and him and his children, and they together formed a battalion in order to fight. Continue. Yes?
Why it's not written in the Siddur?
Oh, so very good. So according to some opinions, when you say in the Siddur, B'mei Matitya ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, they add a vav before the word Hashmonai. They add Vechashmonai Ubanav, according to some Gibsot, separating the 2. They said in total there were either 13, some say 17, there's a few numbers, but in short, it was a very small group of individuals that took on 1.5 million Assyrian Greek, and they fought in a guerrilla warfare. So that's according to one opinion, that the Hashmonaim were the Kohanim themselves, and that they had what's called Maccabim. Who were Maccabim? Maccabim were individuals that entered into the army. So what does Maccabi stand for? If you take Mem, Chaf, Bet, Yud, Mi, Kamocha, Ba'edim, Hashem. And that was one of them. Now that's if you spell Maccabi with a Chaf. But there's also some places where they spell Maccabi with a Kuf. With a Kuf. Why that? Because there's also another word in Hebrew called Makevet. What's Makevet? A hammer, a sledgehammer. Because in order to show the military prowess of the Kohanim and of the Maccabim, they would do it with like Makevet. So what's the issue? Why don't we know how it's spelled? So the issue is that there's a book called Sefer Maccabim. It has 4 volumes. It's not found in the Tanakh because the Tanakh ended with the end of the prophecy. When Nevuah ended with Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and Mordechai HaYehudi, any other books that came later were not there. I'll give you a few books so that you know which books are not included in Tanakh. One of them is called the Septuagint. The Septuagint was Targum HaShiv'im, where the Greeks ended up translating the Torah to this the 70 languages, and they ended up doing it. It happened in Egypt. It was Choshech for 3 days. That book was written Biruach HaKodesh because they ended up all translating the 70 rabbis into the same exact text. But that's not entered into the Tanakh. It's a book what's called Sefarim Chitzonim. But it's used many times as reference for historical purposes, for understanding background history. The Sefer HaMakkabim also was not entered into the Tanakh. It was entered as a Sefer Chitzon, Sefarim Chitzonim, and it went into what's called the Apocrypha, into the Goyim. The Christians use it in part of their New Testament. There's another book also called Sefer Yehudit. You know, the story of Yehudit, of the story of Hanukkah, is not in the Tanakh. So we know a little bit from here and there, from a couple Mamre Hazal, but the majority is in another book called Sefer Yehudit. Now, none of these books are part of the Tanakh, but we use them for historical purposes. Now, when Sefer Maccabim was written, it was written in Greek. It was written in Greek. And in Greek, unfortunately, the word Maccabi, you can't really tell if it's written with a kuf or with a chaf. So we don't know if the Maccabim was talking about Makevet as a sledgehammer, or Maccabi mi kamocha ba'edim Hashem. So there's two opinions, and they both have standing. So just so you understand, according to one opinion, the Hashmonaim were the Kohanim themselves. According to another, no, there was the family of the Kohanim, Matijah, and then there was family of the Hashmonaim. Now I mentioned to you Yohanan Kohen Gadol. Why is that important? Because at the time, over 90% of the Jewish people became Hellenized. What do you mean Hellenized? Hellenized means they became they gave up the religion. They were willing to not do Brit Milah. They were willing to give up all the mitzvot in order to become Hellenist. Now, you tell me, what you tell me originally, what's the big deal? To become Hellenized. Imagine I tell you, Sammy, that in order to be part of the nation, you're not allowed to own any land. You're not allowed to become a doctor. You're not allowed to become a lawyer. But if you choose to be Hellenized, where you violate and don't learn Torah, you don't do Shabbat, then you can own land. This you should know, Jewish people were not allowed to own land in Europe for hundreds of years. In Europe, the Greeks had similar decrees that they were not allowed to do certain things. But if you became Hellenized and you were willing to give up Shabbat and Milah and HaChodesh and all the certain mitzvot, they would allow them to come into the society. So many Jews were willing to give up, not because they really believed the Hellenist, but in order to give up, to be part, in order to get the benefits.
So they not become Jewish anymore.
Well, they lost a lot of their Judaism, for sure, yes.
You can't be part of the community. And
yes, but we're trying to understand why did 90% of the people go off the derech? 90%. There were only 10% left, and the Mishpachat HaKohanim of Matityahu and the Hashmonaim were just the last few. In fact, they all spoke not German. They all spoke Greek. Just like, the comparison of Germany. How many Jews in the 19th century that were there became from Maskilim? They stopped speaking in Lashon HaKodesh. They started speaking in Germany. This same problem that happened in Germany was the same thing that happened in Greece. The reason I say this is that you have to understand they were so far that the Torah was this close from being shocheach and being lost. So now we're in the history of Malchut Yavan Ba'olam and Nes Chanukah. We discussed a little bit of what happened before, and the story of Purim already happened. Purim happened before Chanukah, and now we're in the story of Chanukah. So, Berosha Amad Alexander Mokedon. Alexander the Great was at the head. Sheitchil b'masa kivusha biyoto b'gil 19. So when Alexander was 19 years old, he ended up taking over he was Alexander of Macedonia. He took over the majority of the world. Bishnat 3442, b'mahalach shana zo hechnia et Daryavesh HaParsi. So Alexander the Great ended up taking over Daryavesh, the Persian. Ubishnat 3448, Elef Shana Biduk Leachar Yitziat Mitzrayim Begil 25 Shalat Kvar al 22 Medinot U'Metarich Zeh Nimnet Et Chalat Malchut Yavan Alexander. So what it says that Alexander was 19 years old. He was the son of Philip, the king Philip of Macedonia, and he learned under Aristo. At age 19, he already went out to battle and he took over 22 different countries, and he created what was the Greek Empire. Even though he was from Macedonia, which was a province of Greece, he ended up becoming big. Now, Besof Yamav Shalat al Kol Ha'olam, before he died, Alexander took over the whole world. This was the father of the Greek Empire. Ubegil 32, Hur'al Vamet, he was killed by poisoning at age 32. And he passed very, very young. And he had no children. He did have one mistress called Roxanne, and he had a son from her, but seemingly a few months after he died, the son also was killed, meaning he was the only heir to the throne. What happened after Alexander died? His whole territory was divided by 4 generals. For the important part of Hanukkah, two generals were important. One was Ptolemy, who took over Egypt and North Africa, and then you have the Seleucids, who took over Assyria and the northern part above Israel. Antiochus, he came from the Seleucids in the northern part. He wasn't actually Greek. He descended from the Greek Empire, but he was Assyrian. So it's important to know that. Umalchuto chulka le'arba sarav, got divided into 4. Shilton Yavan ba'eretz Yisrael haya 180 shana b'fnei habayit. 180 years they had their control in the territory, but for 3 years they made the gezerot. When did they actually go into the Beit HaMikdash, take control, start putting pigs on the Bizmeyach? When they made a bit zonot in the Beit HaMikdash? When did this all happen? This was a 3-year process, from Kaf Hei B'Kislev until 3 years later, Kaf Hei B'Kislev, they took it back. According to some opinions, it was a little bit more, but we're going to follow the one that's 3 years here. Dahaino, Mishnat 34, Lebayit Sheni, Ad Shnat 214. This is what you know. From the 34th year that they built the Beit HaMikdash until the year 214 of the second Beit HaMikdash, they were in charge. Just so you understand, they had the full authority. Obviously, they only in the 3 years they go out of their way to put things on the Mizbeach and to defile. But they were the ruling, occupying power in Israel when the Jews were living there. היוונים דיורשיו של אלכסנדר מקדון המשיכו את שלטונם בארץ ישראל ושלטו בארץ בסך הכל 180 שנה, שכבסופם שלט אנטיוכוס אפיפנס הרשע. So this was his name. Antiochus was a name given to many individuals, but this one was called Antiochus Epiphanes Harasha. He gave himself a unique name. שהרבה להצר לישראל, ובימיו הייתה הגזרה הנוראה והקשה ביותר של כתבו לכם על קרן השור, שנמשכה 52 שנה. He made a gezerah for 52 years. They had to write on the horns of the ox, which they used either for pacifiers for children or to feed them. You know, like a baby bottle, they would take the horn, they would make a hole in it, and they would put the milk from one side. I don't know how much they did that to feed the kids, or more for like a pacifier. But they had to write on it, כתבו לכם על קרן השור, אין לכם חלק באלוהי ישראל. They had to write on it, so every day when they would feed the children, the mother, the father, and the child would see on it that they have no chilek in Israel. You see, the Yevanim were out to destroy the religion. They were not out to destroy the Jewish people. Before, if the Jews didn't do a guerrilla warfare against them, the Greeks would have been fine if they just assimilated and dropped their religion, as opposed to the Romans. The Romans were very different. The Romans' policy was, hey, listen, you do whatever you want. As long as you pay taxes and follow the rules and regulations, you can have your own Beit HaMikdash, you do whatever you want. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai told those that wanted to do the rebellion against the Romans before the Churban HaBayit, he said, don't go after them and don't rebel, because you're rebelling for political purposes. Because they're allowing us to learn Torah, they're allowing us to have the Beit HaMikdash, we can do everything we can. You're right, taxes are very high, lots of rules, lots of regulations, lots of laws, very difficult to live by it. But it's not impossible, and they're not after the religion, they're not after killing anybody. Only after the rebellion did the Romans come in and start making gezerot and hashmadot, and they ended up doing pogroms and attacking only after the rebellion. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai warned them. He said, if you don't go after the Romans, you don't bother them, you just continue paying taxes, follow their rules, they'll let you do whatever you want. Just so you know the difference between the Greek and the Romans. But the Greeks were the father of the galut, of it. לאחר מכן גורשו על ידי החשמונאים שהיו 5 בניו של מתתיהו הכהן, והם יהודה, יונתן, יוחנן, שמעון, אלעזר. The 5. Okay? יהודה, יונתן, יוחנן, שמעון, אלעזר.
it's a miracle in a sense, but how this can happen?
Five. So let's assume that, good Sammy, let's assume there's five,
But
and Matijau didn't fight because he was an old man. He was, I don't know if how old he was, but we'll assume he was old enough to be on his deathbed or old enough not to be active. So he had 5 sons. Then we have Hashmonaim, or we'll say the other family. Let's say it's total of 13. Let's say I agree with you, it's 5 and another 8 from the Maccabim. Good. How did they do it? So Sefer Maccabim, volume 1 and volume 2, there's 4 volumes. I'll explain to you the difference. In volume 1, it discusses all the military battles, and they discovered all types of guerrilla warfare. You know, just as a side note, when the United States went into Vietnam and they fought Vietnam, they didn't win the war.
No.
Obviously, America doesn't pride itself that it lost. I don't know why they would, but the rice farmers in Vietnam used guerrilla warfare,
that's right.
and they seemingly won. Don't go so far. Go look at Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Afghanistan was attempted to take over by both the USSR, which is a superpower till today, but which with the founding,
Not the Russian, not the American.
and the Russians were unsuccessful.
Right.
Then the Americans came in, and using the guerrilla warfare of Afghanistan, they lost again. And the Sefer Maccabim 1 gives a lot of credit to the battles that the Hashmonaim fought, because the reality is, how could 5 or 8 or even 17 or 18 or this small number take on 1.5 million Assyrian Greeks and kill them? It was only through guerrilla warfare, which goes, and you should know, in Sefer Maccabim 1, it talks about all the battles, how they won, what they did. And in the military academy of West Point in upstate New York, they actually study all the types of the guerrilla warfares and other warfares that they did from Sefer Maccabim. I don't know if they still do it today, but I know they did in the past, as Rabbi Breitowitz brought down. It's surprising to note also, they don't study the 6-day war, the Milchemet Sheshet HaYamim. Why? Because they said there's nothing you could learn from it. The entire thing was a full miracle. It was all Nis min HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Allah. There was impossible that it could have been anything else. They said there's no purpose to study it, because it was only Sim v'Niflaot.
Right.
And of course, with this war too, against the Yevanim, was also Nisim v'Niflaot. But you should know, if you look at the Ala Nisim, and if you look at our text, you don't actually see that the miracle was the oil and the light. Even though, of course, Masechet Ta'anit brings down that the miracle was that the oil lasted. But what was the main part when the Chachamim instituted the holiday of Hanukkah? It was not the oil. The oil was secondary to the more important part, which was they were able to win the battle, and they were able to get the Torah from being forgotten. Because the miracle of the oil in and of itself, as it's brought down, is important, but it's not important enough to make a holiday. You know, the Hachamim would not have made a holiday if it was just for the oil lasting. That would not have been enough, because that's not a miracle that affects all of Klal Yisrael. And how many people actually would have seen that miracle? If you tell me that the menorah was in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Kodesh, in the Hechal, only the Kohanim can go inside. With the exception, maybe Levi'im can go in if you hung the Levi'im from the top when they had to fix it. But how many people actually saw it? Very few. And if you tell me that they lit the menorah outside the temple, outside in the Chatzir, in the courtyard, because they were still defiled, still very few people would know that there was a miracle with the oil. The main part of the Hanukkah was the winning of the battle, how such a small group of rabbis who were not so skilled in fighting, they were halashim, giburim beyad halashim, they were weak, and they seemingly took over a tremendous army and empire and quelled them for one reason only, so that we can follow Torah and mitzvot. You know, we sometimes take for granted, but in America, Baruch Hashem, God bless America, we're able to practice our religion freely. I have, Baruch Hashem, cousins that live in Paris and in Lyon, France. I can tell you, they're not able to do what we do here. They can't go into the street and do Hachnasat Sefer Torah. They can't walk in the street with a kippah like we can here. And Baruch Hashem, we have this ability. We still have this ability here. I don't know how long it will be this way here in America, because we're seeing a lot of changes from the populace against the religion. They want to say it against Zionism, against anti-Semitism, whatever it is. We've always been in guests in countries, and we always talk about this. How if you look around the room, my parents were Lebanese refugees. We know Ezra's family is Iraqi. We have Sammy, you come from Iraq also. We know you coming, Ariel, from Morocco. We see that we're all, for the most part, first or second generation. That's it. Which tells us there's a time that we are in Galut every single time, but Baruch Hashem, we're able to do it freely. So these 5 ended up taking over, and we're celebrating Chanukah, Shevach vehoda'ah vehalil. We say Halil all the 8 days with Beracha, because the purpose of this holiday is to thank Hashem that everything is a miracle in our life, and that we don't want to take credit. And we tell Hashem, just like in Hanukkah, you did a miracle from something small, you made it something big. Do the same thing with us on this holiday. And this entire holiday is Shevach vehoda'ah. That's the main point. Later on, the miracle of the oil was one that the Gemara brings down. That's the way that we remember. Shayu hagiburim v'shikulam malchut lema'et Elazar shne'erag b'sdei hakerev. All the 5 sons of Matityahu ended up going into the royal family, except for Elazar, who was killed bakrav when he was fighting. Shein chilu ליוונים תבוסה גדולה בעזרת נשיא הבורא יתברך. לאחר מכן נטלו את בית חשמונאי את רסן השלטון על ישראל במשך 103 שנה. The Hashmonaim became parts of the kings for 103 years. They ended up becoming Kohanim and becoming part of the kings of Israel. Normally the kingdomship was only to Malchut Bet David of the tribe of Yehuda, of Judah. Nes Chanukah התרחש בשנת 3622, 138 in BCE, before the Common Era. Mishanazo ad 3648, 112 of the before Common Era. במשך 26 שנה לא שתה אף אומה בישראל, אף מלחמות המקמים יוונים נמשכו. No one for 26 years after they won, the Hashmonaim were able to penetrate, to take over Israel, but they constantly fought the Yevanim even after they won the battle on the 25th of Kislev. That's when they finally did the Hanukkah Mizbeach. They got the Mizbeach back, and they got control of the Beit HaMikdash. You know, just as you have a good reference, it's kind of like the Havdil, the 6-Day War, where before the 6-Day War, people couldn't go to the Kotel. They couldn't pray. After the 6-Day War, they finally took over. They were able to go and pray by the Kotel, both religions.
What about before 1948?
No, for sure not. Before 67, the Jordanians had control, and they had to get permission. One of the forms of permission, Harav Salman Musafi talks about it through his son, Cham Ben Zion Musafi, that they had to get permission from the church. The Jordanians made them go get a permission. They had to go inside the church. And
why through the church?
Because they knew many observant Jews would not walk into a church. So by telling them you had to go to the church to speak to whoever was there, they had to do it, whether it was the priest or the bishop or the archbishop, whichever it was. By telling him that, you prevented him from going to the kotel, because they knew they couldn't go inside. So they'd have to only see the priest on his way out, or when he was walking, or on the nature. After 67, obviously it wasn't needed. Now anyone can go and pray. After the Greeks came, the Romans came in. השתלשות מדרגת זו נמשכה 180 שנה עד חורבן הבית על ידם וכיבוש הארץ. The Romans ended up taking over after 180 years. So he says here, Seder Malche Bet Hashmona'i Bizmanehem. What is the order of the kingdomship? You had Yehuda Maccabi. He was a melech for 6 years. Neherag Bekerev Mul Bekres Tsar Sava Mokedon לאחר שהרג ביוונים 15,000 חיילים. Yehuda Maccabi was killed in battle by the general Mokedon, Tsar Sava Mokedon of Alexander the Great. לאחר שהרג ביוונים, he killed 15,000 people.
By himself?
By himself.
Were there elephants?
There were the Maccabim?
No, the Greeks. Had elephants?
Oh, I'm sure they had elephants from what you saw, what I've read and seen from a couple of depictions. Yeah, but that's what I understand. Yonatan Maccabi, Malach, he was a king for 6 years. Shimona Maccabi was a king for 8 years. Hu v'ishton nisechua lidei Talmai. They were both killed. Shimona Maccabi by Talmai HaMelech, that was from Egypt, North Africa. Melech Mitzrayim Shayach Otano. The king of Mitzrayim, that was the son-in-law. Shnei banav Hurkenos, his 2 children, veYochanan nesru bebet ha'asurim. the two children of Shimon HaMaccabi, Hurkenus and Yochanan, they ended up being placed into prison. Hurkenus neherag v'Yochanan barach mebeit Azulim. Hurkenus was killed, the son of Shimon, and Yochanan ran away, malach tachat aviv, and became king after his father Shimon. So that's Yochanan Hurkenus Yanai. He was a melech tachat aviv Shimon, and he was a king for 26 years, some say 31 years. He was the same Yochanan Kohen Gadol sheshimesh 80 shana keKohen Gadol v'yetza l'tarbut ra'a. So this was the Yochanan Kohen Gadol that was a Kohen for 80 years. There was two opinions. Some say it was the father of Matityahu. That's why Matityahu was willing to sacrifice going to battle with his 5 sons, because he saw that his father was a Kohen Gadol for 80 years and probably became Kohen Gadol at least by age 20, not by age bar mitzvah of 13. So we could assume he was 100 years old, and he saw that his father snapped and became a Siduki. And because he saw that, he realized that the Hellenist ideology has to be stopped really quickly. That's according to one opinion, that it was the father.
Wow.
Some say no. It was later on. It was one of the descendants, that was Yochanan Hurkenus Yanai, Kohen Gadol, that ended up going off the path. But either way, it was either the father or one of the children. The Ramban brings down that all the Maccabim, all the Hashmonaim, actually, the family of Matityahu, were all annihilated by Hurkenus HaMelech, the king, and there were no male descendants, according to Ramban Nachmani, that came and that survived. Because unfortunately, the sad part of the story of Hanukkah, which isn't well spoken about, was that it was a success to take back the Beit HaMikdash and to do the Hanukkah HaMizbeach. But what in essence happened here? You had the Kohanim who ended up becoming kings, and they ended up taking from Malchut Beit David, which Ruach HaChamim lo nocha himenu. The rabbis were not happy that the Kohanim became kings. That was not their job. They seemingly got punished, and all of them annihilated, where there was no descendants from the male lines, according to at least one opinion. And what also happened is they themselves, the Kohanim that liberated the Jewish people from the Yevanim, they became themselves Hellenized, because when you start to look at their descendants, you start to look, they went from having Jewish names, Yehuda, Yonatan, Yochanan, Shimon, and Elazar, and they ended up having names like Yochanan Hurkenus Yanai. That doesn't sound like a Jewish name, and they themselves started to become Hellenized after time, and they became corrupt in becoming the leaders of the kings. Now, of course, we look at them as tzaddikim, as righteous, but in the eyes of the Chachamim, this corruption came to them.
What's Hellenized?
Hellenized means they Hellenized from Hellen, from the Greek terminology, that they went off the path and assimilated to become like the Greeks. Not religious, carrying their names, thinking like them, the philosophy, and all that, all those items that fit within it. And what's the sad part is that, okay, besides that they became part of the royal family, which was not their job, they ended up becoming Hellenized. All the descendants ended up getting killed by Hurkenus HaMelech on the male line, on the male side. And at the end of the day, the Romans ended up coming in and taking over, and they didn't keep the stronghold of the Beit HaMikdash for a long term. So, of course, it's a happy part of the story, but in essence, if you look at the descendants, they didn't hold true what was the emet of what the Torah wanted, where the Kohanim stay Kohanim, and the Malchut Beit David stays on Malchut Beit David. And to be a Kohen Gadol for 80 years and then to snap at the end is not a joke. It was a tremendous loss. Okay, Beharag Rabbi Mechachma Yisrael, and this king Yochanan Hurkenus Yanai, who was a king after Shimon, according to this opinion, he killed many of the rabbis in Israel after he became a Siduki. Haya Yochanan Kohen Gadol Nosaf le'achar Shimon HaSadik. Okay, there was another Yochanan Kohen Gadol after Shimon HaSadik. Aristobulus.
Shimon HaTzadik was at the time of Alexander the Great, right?
Yes, he was the one that we spoke about yesterday. He went out to greet, exactly. He went to greet, and when Alexander saw him, he ended up allowing the Beit HaMikdash to stay.
That was the first time the garb of the Kohen Gadol was on outside the Beit HaMikdash.
I don't know if it was the first time, but I do know that he did wear it, and that because of that, all the Jewish boys that were born that year had the name Alexander as a memorial to him.
So what about people nowadays who have Alexander?
Yeah, because it became a name of a Jewish name, and we still have thanks to Alexander the Great for not destroying the Beit HaMikdash.
Wow.
Go figure, we're still thanking him to some
He
extent.
roamed around Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He roaming Jerusalem.
Yeah, for sure. He didn't take over, but yeah, he definitely came in.
Did he pillage?
No, that was why they were so thankful to him. Now, when he died at age 32, he was poisoned. The four descendants, 32.
He was poisoned?
He was poisoned
Who killed him?
and killed. I don't know, but if I find out, I'll let you know. Now, next one here is Aristobulus.
Wait, what were you about to say?
About what?
About that.
I'll remember now. Aristobulus ben Yochanan Hurkenos Yanai. He was the son of this Yochanan Hurkenos Yanai. He malach tachat aviv v'niftar b'shnat malchuto hasheniya. He was only a king for 2 years. Alexander Yanai ben Yochanan Hurkenos. He was the other son of Yochanan. Malach tachat achiv habechor, after his son, for 18 years. Some say 27 years. And he was the Giso of Shimon ben Shatach, the brother-in-law of Shimon ben Shatach. וגם הוא לחם נגד הפירושים, הרג את רוב חכמי ישראל. He was the brother-in-law of Shimon ben Shatach, but this descendant, Alexander Yanai, fought against the rabbis. The Pirushim were you would call them today, the Orthodox rabbis. And he killed many of the rabbis in Israel. This was just to show you. I'm showing you what happened to the corruption of the children of Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, and what happened. Then you have Alexandra, who had another name, Shlom Sion HaMalka HaSadeket. She was righteous. She was the wife of Alexander Yanai, the king. When Alexander Yanai died, she was the righteous one in the family. Hayta Achot Shimon ben Shatach. She was the sister of Shimon ben Shatach. Malka Mishnat 3688. For 9 years she was king. Ve'etiva me'odim ha'pirushim. She did very good for the Orthodox, the religious. She'eshivu milchama se'ara neged Sidukim. She fought the Sidukim. She'er'u lahem bisman Yanai HaMelech. You have to understand, being Orthodox Jewish at the time, the Pirushim was risky because you had people in power that were self-hating Jews that were Sidukim. They hated the rabbis. They said, we follow the Torah.
They just believe in culture?
They believed in culture, but they were more than just believing in culture. They had a shita. They had an opinion. Their opinion was, we follow the Torah, but we don't follow the rabbis. We follow the Tanakh. We follow that. We don't follow what the rabbis say.
Who created the Tzedukim?
So that was from the students of Antigonus, Ish Shlocho. He had 2 students, Sadok and Baitos. And those 2 went off the path, went off the derech. They were OTD, not OCD. OTD is off the derech. And they probably were OCD also. And they created another division in the religion. Now, you have to understand that kind of like the Reform and Conservative movement, where they have a power through their money and through their connections, networking, and government in certain places, these Sidukim did the same thing. But back then, they would actually kill their opponents. If someone didn't agree with them, they went after them to kill them. It was very dangerous. It was very...
Yeah, the Reform movement, it's not alive anymore. The conservative movement, it's not...
So they still have...
It's dwindling down.
It's dwindling down, but they still have a certain power in regards to numbers. You're right, it's dwindling down for a simple purpose.
The same thing with the Tzedukim? Did it dwindle down?
So a couple of things. When it comes to the Reform and Conservative movement, it's a little different only because there's no continuation with Reform, which means there's no next generation.
Children don't care for it.
They don't care for it because they make there's too many changes. There's no Misorah, which is a heritage like we do in the Orthodox world, where we pride ourselves in not changing. What's the biggest thing you can do as a Talmid Hacham, as a rabbi that teaches, is that whatever you learned from the rabbis and the yeshivot, whatever you took, you give it over in that same way. That's the Misorah. I received it and I give it over. Of course, you're teaching it in your style, in your way, but you're within the guidelines. You're just taking and We're not about changing. Orthodox is not about changing. Obviously, there's going to be machlokot and opinions and how things are learned, especially in halacha and in hashkafa and musad, philosophy, all that stuff. But we're not about changing. We're about keeping it exactly the same. And especially if you're from the Syrian community, you're specifically not about changing, even when you might learn that things are to be done differently. A lot of interesting things in the Syrian community, which I subscribe to, being that I was born there and educated on it, is that a lot of things are not changed even when there seemingly could be a better option. There's reasons for it. Don't change. There's something to it. And let's continue on with a few more lines here.
Are there Tzedukim still around?
Yeah, 100%. For sure. You can call them
Jews?
conservative. Yeah, of course.
Where do they live?
They're all over. Listen, a Siduki, back then the Siduki were prided themselves with Sidukim, and they had things. Today you can call them reform, conservative, or you can call them liberals and leftists.
Oh, those are Tzedukim?
Yeah. I mean, obviously they might not label themselves Sidukim because they're not sitting. You have to understand there was a time where people valued knowledge, philosophy, religion, and they had a opinion. Today, people don't care about religion. They don't care about God. Today, the people are so far away. Like, you're asking me like a specific, like there's for sure. There's the thing.
I one time I googled Tzedukim, and you see like Bedouin tribes. That's real Tzedukim?
Yeah. So there are Shomronim and Kutim in Israel that still follow this stuff, for sure.
Follow the Torah.
Yeah, they still follow.
They have Torah scrolls
in their way, according to their opinion. Now, of course, their religion can be questioned back and forth because everything that they do seemingly was taken from the Pirushim, from the Orthodox Jews. Almost everything. But you have to know that it wasn't always easy for people to practice their religion freely. Today, what we're able to do is really, it was unfounded for most of the last 2,000 years. All right, let's finish up here. Aristobulus, who malach besof chaye imo, at the end of his mother's son, time, Bishnat 3697, Achiv Hurkenus, Nitmana le Kohen Gadol, his brother became Kohen Gadol, that's Hurkenus. Bizot al yedei peshara she'asu benehem Chachmei Yisrael, that was an agreement that they made with the rabbis. La'achar sichsuch memushach ben achim ba melech Romi, when the brothers were fighting, after they made peace with the rabbis, came the king of Rome, Pompeius, al pi derishat Hurkenus v'himlichet Hurkenus, he made Hurkenus the king, v'haraget kol ohave Aristobulus v'asaret Aristobulus, he made Hurkenus the king, and he killed all the friends of Aristobulus, and he put Aristobulus in prison. Machlokotam garma shePompeius haromi hitziv yad b'Yehuda b'Yerushalayim, because of the argument between Aristobulus and Hurkenus, the Roman king came in, he took control of Yehuda and Yerushalayim. Umehem ve'al yadam ba'a le'am Yisrael hatzarat zo hatzarat galut Romi, because of that argument between the brothers, from that time Aristobulus and Hurkenus, Rome got powerful, and till today the Roman ideology is still around, even in America. They had to pay a tremendous tax, and they had to subdue themselves to the Roman government. The next one was Hurkenus, Malach le'achar she'achiv Aristobulus hudach, after Aristobulus was put into prison. Gam Hurkenus hudach al yedei Achiano, and also Hurkenus what ended up getting attacked by his brother-in-law. Let's take a look here. Antigonus, beno shel Aristobulus, he was the son of Aristobulus. Malach la'achar shediach et Hurkenus dodo, after there was a coup against his uncle Hurkenus, shiltonon nimshach 3 shanim, he was king for 3 years. Va'az nirsach al yedei Hurdus shemalach b'mkomo echel mishnat 3724, and then he was killed Antigonus. You can see from all the names, Antigonus, Hurkenus, Aristobulus, they all had Greek names. They went from Jewish names to Greek names.
What year did the Beis Hamikdash fall?
In the Common Era, around the year 70.
Oh, the Hebrew calendar.
It was year 70. When it came to the destruction, let's see if he brings down here.
The year 70? No, what do you mean? The 70th year from creation? No.
No, 70 of the Common Era.
What about the Hebrew?
It was 3830 or 3828 if you use year 68. So 3828.
First.
The second Beit HaMikdash.
3820.
3828 if you use the year 68 of the Common Era, the years that we have, the English years. the Gregorian calendar would be, if you use it, we're in 2023 now, so if you use that 68, then it's 38/28 of the Jewish calendar. Okay, if you take the year 70, it would be 3830. So you have that number. That was the Churban. And at the end, Hordus, the king, comes along and he kills. He ends up killing Antigonus, and he ends up becoming the king. Hordus, at the end, kills most of the descendants of the Hashmonaim, of the children of Matitya. Sachakol Shnot Malchut Bet Hashmonai. The Hashmonaim, the full time of their kingdomship was 103 years. After Hordus or Herod took over, he shmided kulam, he killed them all, with no reference to them at all. And then it says in Baba Batra, Daf Dalet Amud Bet, V'chol ha'omen bibet Hashmona'i ani, eno ela Eved Mamzer. Anyone who says he's from the Hashmonaim, he's either a slave or he is a mamzer, a bastard that was not born in a legitimate way. Why did they end up having this punishment? They took the Malchut of David, Nosaf, the Kehuna, Shatalem, above their Kehuna, as brought down by the Ramban. You can see it in Vaychi, in the pasuk Lo Yasur Shevet Miuda Umchokek Mibin Raglav. That was Yaakov Avinu's blessing and tochecha and warning that they put through, and this is part of the end of the Malchut of the Hashmonaim and the history. Tomorrow, Bili Neder will put together a quick chart of the times, and we'll do a quick review on this. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.